Welcome back to Talking About the Taboo. You know who it is. It's Natalie Malloy. Welcome to the podcast where curious minds run to, who are on a mission to know everything there is to know. You can't really know everything, or can you? About sex and relationships and vulnerability and connection and orgasms and sex positions. And I'm getting turned on. But, anyways, we are on episode 2 of the History of Sex series. I know I've kept you guys waiting and I've edged you on just enough. And I'm excited to share with you today's episode, which, as if you read in the description, but I'll put it in this description as well. Episode 1 was just kind of like a little teaser representing, what I'm going to talk about. And the actual episode, instead of the pilot episode, will be about ancient civilization, specifically talking about temple prostitution, things like that. So within this episode, we are merging basically kind of all of the ancient civilizations together, but I'm giving you some jaw-dropping like facts and crazy things to know about. And in the other alternate episodes, I will specifically zone in on, ancient Greeks, Mesopotamia, and things of that nature. I do want to give a disclaimer. I am horrible at grammar and I am horrible at pronunciation. So, throughout this episode, if I stutter or if I have to repronounce something, please don't judge me. A lot of these names and the temple names, god names are very hard to pronounce. And in my research, I made sure to try to make sure it's the right pronunciation. But again, I could still mess up. So please do not judge me. This is something that I've been working on and researching, and I'm super excited to share with you what I found. Some of these things are fucking crazy, like what they had to do and what was expected out of women and what was expected out of men, and just the power dynamics in general. So I'm really excited to fucking get into this right now. I love, love, love the idea of digging into the past of what sex was like back then and what even just relationship dynamics were like, BCE and everything like that. So without further ado, remember to CLIT-MUNICATE. Stay tuned. Hey, you stayed. I love it. So these are places where, sex wasn't just something that happened in private. It was sacred and it was ritual and it was also political. So that's a huge thing. That's like, holy fuck. And people believed that sex could bring good harvests and that the kings could legitimize their power through sacred unions, and that offering your body in a temple could literally keep society running. Yeah. Yeah. So getting into this episode, this really isn't the version of history you were taught in school, okay? This is history through the lens of intimacy, power, spirituality. So buckle up. We're about to step into a world where sex was prayer, where pleasure was divine, and where the act of love itself was seen as a bridge to the gods. Throughout my research, I was dumbfounded, honestly, by what I found. And honestly, when we think of sex, in the ancient world, many of us imagine secrecy, shame, or at best something hidden behind like the closed doors, right? And, in the closet. We're taking it out of the closet because in reality, sex is in ancient civilizations, was anything but private. It was divine, it was political, it was woven directly into survival of entire societies. They relied on sex and intimacy, how to make the world keep going. So today, obviously, we're traveling back thousands of years to Mesopotamia, Egypt, Greece, and going beyond where, sacred sex and temple prostitution weren't just accepted. They were actually required, and they were essential. They were essential parts of culture. So these particular rituals weren't seen as scandalous, okay, or immoral. Honestly, they were seen as holy and powerful and absolutely necessary to keep the crops growing, the rivers flowing. Ooh, that rhymed. Um, and the people absolutely thriving. So, like, imagine today, like, everybody had to have sex and go into a temple, and they had to basically be a prostitute. And come to find out as well, particularly in, certain cultures back then, actually all of them, the word prostitution wasn't necessarily derogatory. So let's start in Mesopotamia. Okay, so often it's also called the cradle of civilization. So in cities like Babylon and Uruk, sexuality was directly tied to the gods. I cannot believe I pronounced that so well. So the goddess Inannu, also known as Ishtar, was the goddess of love, fertility, and war, and she was worshipped with rituals that revolved around sex. So worshipped, ooh, my total wannabe sex scene is to be worshipped and devoured. That's one of my core desires. So fuck yeah, Ishtar. So, one of the most striking practices described by ancient resources that I found was temple prostitution. So, Herodotus, a Greek historian writing in the 5th century BCE, he claimed that every woman in Babylon was expected at least once in her life to go to the temple of Ishtar, the goddess of sex, love, and fertility, sit there and wait for a stranger to offer her money. Exactly what prostitution is here. So she would have sex with him and an offering to the goddess. And modern scholars, though, currently, so we kind of dig back to people like looking at this now, debate whether this was truly universal. But what's clear, as we're hearing, is that sacred prostitution was very real in Mesopotamia and in Mesopotamian cities, particularly. And women who, engaged in these rituals were not seen as degraded, like I mentioned before. They were honored for ensuring that society continued to thrive and ensuring that fertility of the land and the well being of the people were taken into account. So, like, imagine that sex was not a sin, but a civic duty. Yeah. So you weren't arrested for prostitution back in BCE, but or back in Mesopotamia, my apologies. But yeah, you were prided on it. Prided on it. So even more fascinating though is the role that these practices played in the economy. Remember, we're going into like the wows, the economy, politicians or politics. So prostitution in Mesopotamia wasn't a fringe or an hidden activity, like I mentioned. It was a legitimate profession and often tied to the temple system. So sacred prostitutes contributed to the temple's wealth, and sex work itself helped fuel city economies. Well, currently, sex work does fuel the economy, but in some areas, some people feel like it's not, but it's super high right now. I mean, I have people on my podcast all the time talking about I have sex workers on. I just had a sex worker on who was a previous porn star and is merging into her life. And I mean, it's filling the pockets of, I guess, them particularly. And in fact, back then, and some very of the first written contracts we have, though, from Mesopotamia that I was looking at include references to sexual transactions, showing how deeply intertwined sexuality and economics were. This is still happening to this day, but I feel like it's more undercover, more taboo. And so, in a way, these ancient practices reminded us that sex work has always been work, long before modern debates and legality and morality. It's always been a thing. So, again, nothing has really changed besides we're making it more of a secret. I mean, there's safety concerns, obviously, within prostitution. There's safety concerns within sex work, but it's always been a thing. This isn't a new thing. Okay, this is not new. And so I continued to research on this idea, and another jaw dropping aspect of Mesopotamian ritual life was the sacred marriage. Okay, so the hero skamos, again, pronunciation, I'm so sorry. And is this a ceremony that the king of the city would ritually have sex with the high priestess of Inanu, and basically this sex ritual sex symbolized the union of the god and goddess themselves and was believed to renew the fertility of the land, guarantee agricultural success, and legitimize the king's rule. So, without this sacred union, the kingdom itself was thought to be in jeopardy. So, you kind of had pressure to have sex. And thinking about that, though, it's like wild because there was pressure to have to do that and to give their body, and I wonder, like, really what goes on in their heads and if they realize what was going on. And, you think about how wild it is that the entire political stability of the nation rested on ritual sex between two humans standing in the divine figures. So it wasn't about intimacy really. It was about cosmic alignment and nation building through erotic ritual, which is nice. We should always tap into our eroticism. But then there's things that, you think about, like, what did they feel about the pressure of having to like save the whole world? Like, imagine having to have good sex, ritual sex to save the whole fucking world. Like, that's fucking wild to me. But again, like, are they exaggerating it? I don't know. But like, mm, and ancient myths do echo this world's view in the epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest surviving works of literature. So, a wild man named Enkidu is civilized through sex with Shamahat, a temple prostitute. So again, a lot of these names are very confusing, and I was trying to understand all of them. But essentially, after 6 days, and 7 nights of lovemaking, Enkidu becomes wise and self-aware and able to enter human society. So it was like a path into like righteousness and like figuring out like jaw like or ball droppingness. I don't know. And this story highlights how powerful sex was considered. It was considered to change your whole being and your whole life and your whole personality. It could transform someone from animal to human, from wildness to civilization itself. So for Mesopotamians, sex wasn't just like pleasure or reproduction. It was transformative, entirely transformative, actually, and sacred, energetical, and it shaped entire lives and societies. It was absolutely crazy. But I like crazy. That's my thing. That's why I'm here. Duh. That's my main character. So then, Egypt has its own erotic rituals. So, festivals honoring Hathor, the goddess of love, fertility, and music, often involved drunken celebrations, music, and sexual play. I like sexual play. Ooh la la. So, one inscription that I read even describes how women would lift their skirts and flash the sun god called Ra, Ra, to cheer him up when he was sulking, reminding him of fertility and life. I kind of like that, like, ooh, flash. I know this kind of might sound shocking. I mean, to not a normal viewer, you guys watching, it's not shocking to you, but it shows how bodies and sexuality were directly linked with, renewal, cosmic renewal. Even the Nile River's flooding, which was essential for agriculture, was described in sexual terms. Guys, sex always sells. Sex sold back then, sex sells currently, and sex will always sell. Going back to like Betty Boop era, you know what I'm saying? Like, it'll always sell. So, an act of union between gods that spilled life-giving waters across the land. So, basically, an act of God, the flashing and the rituals, things like that. It was all sexual related. Of course, in within the documents that we have, we did not live there, but we're vicariously living through the history. And then kind of really wild is in Greece. So sex had a sacred dimension, though in like different ways. So the cults of Dionysus, which is the god of wine, ecstasy, and chaos, you mean me, involved wild rituals where worshippers drank, danced, and sometimes engaged in orgies. Yum. And they meant to dissolve boundaries between humans and gods. Ooh, okay, dissolve boundaries. Do I like that word? Yeah, I do. But essentially, the Hetairai, or sacred courtesans, were not just sex workers, but highly educated women. So, who moved in intellectual and political circles. At this point, they could actually influence leaders. And again, sex sells, right? Participate in symposizu, ziza, and honestly, they were often seen as muses and advisors. So that's fucking awesome. So the symposiza essentially were meetings with the gods, so they can participate in these. Like, whoa, women are like in politics. So sex in Greece wasn't just transactional; it was like actually cultural currency tied to art and politics and philosophy. So women were able to step in. Whoa, Greece. Whoa, we're seeing women as in power principles, in power seats. I fucking love it. Yes, and like honestly, their bodies were a temple, right? So then we're moved further east in India. Early spiritual traditions, sexuality was often and was also revered, while full-blown tantra sex, I've talked about it before, would develop later. So, early Hindu practices already linked sexual union with cosmic union, but the idea that merging of the male and the female energy mirrored the merging of divine forces. So, basically, just shows how universal this theme was across civilizations. Even in ancient China, Taoists, texts described sexual energy, or Jing, as a life force, teaching that careful cultivation of sex would lead to health, longevity, and even immortality. So, absolutely wild how, again, sex sells. Whoa. Whoa. Honestly, what might surprise you the most about the ancient world is just how like boldly sexuality showed up in everyday life and religion. So like kind of tying it back to Mesopotamia again, sex wasn't just ritual. Again, it was civilizing power. And a shamahat, a temple prostitute, like I said, it is said to have made love with, the wild man. So Enkidu for 6 days and 7 nights straight, transforming him from animal to human, remember? So, erotic poetry and even early sex manuals were carved into clay tablets, offering some of the earliest written guidance on sexual technique. So, there was literally a fucking porn book on how to do sexual fucking things correctly and fucking positions. What? Like, it was amazing, like, looking at those. And in Egypt, the god Atum was believed to have created the world through masturbation, and priests sometimes reenacted his ejaculation into the Nile to ensure fertile floods. Fertile floods. Yeah, just jerking off into the Nile. Oh yeah. Gods like Osiris and Isis were not siblings, but lovers. So a divine incest also was a huge thing, and it was mirrored by the pharaohs who married sisters to preserve the bloodline. Oh boy. Yeah. So there was some incest. So festivals for Heather weren't tame. They included a lot of dancing and intoxication, a lot of fucking beer, and the use of stone and wooden dildos. You heard that right. Wooden dildos. Yeah, some of which agriculturists actually have uncovered in tombs. They put the fucking wooden dildos in the tombs. They did. Yep. So I want one of those. Oh god. Because Greece too was anything but prudish though, because athletes competed nude in the Olympic Games. Yeah, the Olympics, but nude style. I like it. So they were celebrating the erotic beauty of the male body while, temples to Aphrodite, house sacred prostitutes who I mentioned would work and consider that an act of worship. So public spaces were decorated with statues and complete with enormous erections. That's pretty normal. We've seen those today. I think there's one literally on the expressway in Buffalo. So these weren't obscene. These were seen as protective and fertility symbols. But in Rome, one of the gods uh had an erect penis. So he was literally enshrined in gardens where his oversized phallus, wooden, yeah, garden, it was guarded against evil. So like his basically what I'm trying to say is that his hard cock guarded against evil. And graffiti in Popeye openly described sexual encounters and preferences, showing that sex talk was not hidden. I fucking love it. Showing that sex talk was not hidden. When I read that, I was like, yes, am I in the wrong era? It was literally like written on the walls. So beyond the Mediterranean, okay, so we're kind of diving a little bit in India, surprise. I found some things on India. The roots of Kama Sutra were tied to sexual pleasure, right? To spirituality, duty, and making intimacy one of the four pillars of the meaningful life. While early, remember the tantric stuff I was talking about? Practices were even included in group sex. Oh, yeah, group sex rituals. So it was honestly, though, it was different from now. It was meant to merge human and the divine energy. Tantric sex is very like breath work. So in China, Taoist teachings, what I mentioned again earlier, went further still. Men were told to conserve semen well, it was a vital life source. So semen was vital, like IVs. So they were absorbing women's sexual fluids during intercourse was thought also to grant longevity and even immortality. Fuck, if my discharge gives you immortality, fuck yeah. So, taken together, these practices showed just how like radically different the ancients viewed sexuality. Again, they did not view it as taboo or sinful, but it was transformative, shaping pretty much everything in the universe itself. So, honestly, here is like the jaw-dropping truth. For the thousands of years, human beings saw sex as something holy. It wasn't just about personal desire, it was about connecting to the gods, right? And it was about ensuring the survival of society, which is fucking crazy. Imagine the pressure, and keeping the universe itself in balance. So, sex was prayer, sex was ritualistic, sex was politics, sex was economy. And compare that to the way later Western traditions would frame sex, right? Like now, as sinful, private, shameful, and the contrast staggering. It's kind of moment of silence for that is the shift we're seeing. And I think we can have a mix of both. You can keep some things to the imagination, but also not make it so fucking taboo. As we wrap up this first episode in the History of Sex series, I invite you to reflect on one question. What would it mean if instead of seeing sex as dirty or taboo, we saw it as sacred, powerful, and life giving? How might that change the way we treat ourselves, our partners, and our world and our nature? In the next episode, we'll move forward into more classical antiquity, dive deeper into, how Greece and specifically Rome shaped erotic culture, philosophy, and politics in ways, that still echo today. I love you all. And with lots and lots of lube, remember, communicate.